Part of the plan for our city's sewer system was going to be 2 identical tiles that could be used in multiple settings. Today we're going to build those. So as always, I'm going to start by putting together the layout, and here's the diagram of the tile that I'm going to be putting together. Now, I have found that when transferring the layout from one of these diagrams to the foam board, it really helps to have the diagram close by. So I'm just kind of putting it here on the board as I'm tracing things out and just kind of eyeballing a few measurements here or there. The only measurements that I know that are going to be consistent are the entry points on the 4 sides that lead from other tiles. So I'm using them as my rough basis for judging all of the dimensions and positioning of all the walls and framework of where everything is going to go. Now, since I'm going to be making 2 identical tiles, I don't want to bore everyone with making everything twice, so I'm going to put together 1 tile on camera and then do the other one off camera. As the outer walls were coming together, I had to decide whether or not the walkways were going to be the same width as the previous tile or if they were going to be narrower. And I ended up deciding that instead of a 3 to 4 inch wide walkway, we were going to have 2 inch wide walkways with a few areas that were a little bit larger to kind of be little impromptu rooms or areas where models could gather. This will make it feel a little bit more like an underground sewer area. Alright, with that done, we can go ahead and start adding in the grid to the floor. So off camera, I marked some guide points around the edges of the foam board, and this is just there to kind of be a guide for the ruler as I scribe everything in with an X-Acto blade. Now, each of these lines are overlapping with the areas that are going to be underneath the wall sections, and I'm doing that specifically because then if the wall sections are a little bit missized or not quite wide enough to cover all the walkways, it won't really be all that noticeable, and it'll look like the stone flooring kind of continues underneath the wall sections. And once I've finished up the lines going in one direction, I will rotate the board 90 degrees and take care of the other direction off camera. And then I'll exaggerate the lines the same way I've done in previous videos with a dull pencil. And this is just to kind of exaggerate the grout lines and kind of lay everything into place. And you kind of want to do this before you add texture, because the texture will kind of press all the lines together and make it a lot harder to exaggerate them later. Then using my homemade texture roller, I added some stony texture just to kind of give it that nice kind of worked stone appearance. Then once I had finished the entire board, I went back over all of the lines with a ballpoint pen to re-exaggerate the grout lines and kind of make sure I didn't lose any detail that way. Alright, so now that that's done, we can go ahead and start making some pipeworks. So I found these on Amazon a little while back and wasn't quite sure what to do with them at the time, but now that I'm making a sewer system, I think they'll work out quite nicely for that. Now, I didn't want to have every tile be the exact same in that it has a large open trench for the sewage to kind of flow through, and having found these amongst my random bits and bobs, I decided that they would be a really nice addition to a couple of the tiles to kind of add a little bit of extra something without being massively large in the endeavor to put them into place. And I'll split all of these between the two tiles. Now, this part is optional. I noticed that the clear plastic pipes were a lot more difficult to see on camera than I had expected, so I'm just kind of coloring them with a Sharpie so that they're easier to see on camera. But it did have a side benefit though. When I got to the painting step, the paint stuck to the pipes a lot easier than it would have if they were just kind of the plain clear plastic. It seems that adding the layer of Sharpie really made it easier for the paint to stick. Alright, so now I took all the pipes that I was going to use. I basically split the box of the pieces in half and decided to just kind of come up with a few different ways of adding the pipes just to kind of create a few little twists and turns to lay out a pretty simple design. Now, there's no real rhyme or reason to where I'm putting all of these. I'm just kind of laying them out and trying to decide, do I want this to be one continuous piece? Do I want multiple pieces? Do I want them to line up along the edge of the grid or go through a block? Things like that. Once I was happy with the shape of the pipes, I went over the outside edge of them with a ballpoint pen just to kind of mark out where everything was going to go. So that way I could remove the pipes and kind of fit the area and carve everything out. And speaking of carving everything out, I just took a simple X-Acto blade and just kind of sawed my way through various areas. And working a little bit at a time, I chipped away at the foam to kind of dig out a trench, and then did a few tests here or there to make sure everything fit nice and flush with the surface. Once everything had been dug to the correct depth and nothing was protruding overly tall, I took some hot glue and just kind of squirted it into the trenches and fit the pipes down over the top of it. And once they were in, they were pretty solid and didn't feel like they were going to come out. So that worked out pretty nicely. And as you can see, some of the edges are going to go underneath the wall foundations, so it'll just kind of help lock everything in once we get to the assembly stage of the build. Alright, now it's time to create our walls. So I decided I wanted to try and save a little bit of foam, and to do that I traced out as many walls into a single brick as I could, trying to keep in mind that some of them were going to be reversed from each other for various areas, and carefully cut them out with my new hot wire table. And since I'm making two identical tiles, I'm cutting out two of each wall section that I'm going to need. And any of these leftover chunks that I don't use for this build can be used later, either for little filler pieces, or maybe I'll make some like rubble piles or something like that that I can use these pieces for later. Alright, so right now we've got two of the tiles that have their own unique little setup of pipes and walls. Oh, so many walls. So now that the walls had been cut out, it was time to add our texture to the outside of them. I made a whole bunch of strips of the flagstone texture pieces of 16th inch foam, and using a little bit of hot glue, applied them to the outside edge of all of our wall sections. And any areas that had some overhang like this, I trimmed off and sealed the edge with a little bit more hot glue just to kind of make everything flush and not kind of removable. Then, wherever possible, I used the scrap leftover pieces to cover gaps and areas on other wall sections. And once all the sides were covered, I made a simple stone grid to fit all the tops of the walls and attach them with a little bit of hot glue. And I laid out the grid and textured these off camera because I didn't really want to rehash it from the previous video. Okay, so now that that's done, it's time to start sealing and painting everything. So to seal all of the foam, I did a 50-50 mix of some matte black paint and some Mod Podge, and then using a brush, I just applied it to all of the cut grid squares, taking special care to kind of fill in the grout lines as much as I could to make sure that there wasn't any of the original foam visible from above. Now, you could make this process a little bit easier if the paint was a little bit more runny. It would help flow into the cracks a little bit more. But I did not do that on this batch. I'll probably end up doing it on the next one. Once all the foam was sealed, I did an overbrushing with some gray from Artist Loft, and I did this in two directions. Kind of swiping at one angle and then rotate 90 degrees, and then swiping from the other angle just to kind of have a omnidirectional appearance for the gray. And once that was all dried, I did a dry brushing with some neutral gray just to kind of pick out all of the top highlights. Now you can see I'm covering the pipeworks quite a bit during this. Not to worry, we're going to paint them a completely different color a little bit later. But if you kind of like the gray appearance of them, you can absolutely leave that in. I just want something a little bit more metallic when I get to the pipes. Now, I'm not filming it, but I am also doing this exact same pattern of paints to all of the wall sections. Then, using some raw sienna, I stipple that onto the ground layer of the foam. This gives a nice kind of uneven appearance and just kind of makes it look a little bit more spread out. The idea is to kind of have a grungy, dirty appearance to it. Then on the sides of all of our wall sections, I do a dry brush of the raw sienna to kind of add that same dinginess to all of these surfaces. And then to tie it in with our previous tile set, I'm going to dry brush over that raw sienna with a little bit more of the neutral gray. This will cover up a lot of it, but you'll still see a lot of the kind of dingy griminess showing through all of the neutral gray. Now for our pipes, I went over everything with some silver. This is just to kind of be a base coat. And when it comes to using metallics from an acrylic line of paints. The brighter the undercoat, the more vibrant the upper coats are going to be. So I'm just using this silver as kind of like a additional primer layer to cover up all of the previous dry brushing. Then, using a little bit of metallic bronze, I'm going to carefully go over all of the pipes again, and this will be a nice kind of vibrant, bright bronze color. Now, any areas where I kind of spill over and touch the tiles, I can remove that with a damp, clean brush. Once the bronze had dried, I used a little bit of some red oxide paint, and this went onto all of the connection points for all of the pipes to kind of signify a little bit of a rusted area. And then to kind of make the pipes look a little bit more dingy and worn, I add a pretty generous layer of some Null oil from Citadel Paints. This will help the pipes to have a little bit more of an aged appearance, but still have that nice kind of shiny bronze appearance. Alright, so now that everything is painted and sealed, we can start assembling. So I'm going to use a little bit more of this all-purpose adhesive, kind of like liquid nails, to put everything together. And then the wall sections, I'm going to do just a simple line of hot glue around the outside of the bottom edge. And what this is going to do is kind of hold the brick down and prevent it from moving while all of the all-purpose adhesive grabs hold and cures into place. Now, the curing process takes about an hour or so, depending on how much you apply and how much air can get in. So I'm not sure exactly how long these are going to take since I'm doing a hot glue layer around the outside edge, but between the hot glue and the Loctite, these should be pretty firmly held in place once everything is dried. And from this angle, you can really see the difference between the walls and the floor layers of the tile as well, just kind of showing the slightly different highlights that you can see in the paint layers. And with the last wall going into place, episode 7 is now finished. Alright, so I put two of the tiles next to each other just to kind of showcase how everything would look. On the right is the tile we made in the previous episode, and on the left is the tile we just finished. And here I've got all three finished tiles lined up, just kind of showing how we can use them to make a fairly long underground sewer system. Alright, so that's going to be it for today. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe for future content, comment down in that comment section, let me know how I'm doing, how you're enjoying the project, and we will see everyone next episode.